This is the First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the First Century. Episode 33. Caligula visits Germany. While in northern Italy, and having sent away his two sisters and Lepidus on charges of treason, Gaius had the sudden idea to travel further north into Germany. Besides, there were rumors that some of his German generals were in on the plot hatched by his sisters and Lepidus. As imperator, he had not been in battle before, and Germania could provide that opportunity. His father and his own namesake was Germanicus, after all. Gaius hoped to gain some of the accolades that had been bestowed on his father. He also remembered how, as a toddler, the soldiers had such care and affection for him when he was in that region. They had given him the nickname Bootikins, or Little Boots, because at that age he used to dress up in a soldier's outfit and give orders to the soldiers. Now, as princeps, he arrived at the Upper Rhine in October, and met the general Gnaeus Lentulus Gaetulicus, who had served as consul in 26 and then commander of the Upper Rhine legions for the past 10+ years. Gaetulicus, the name, was given to his father in the year 6 CE as he conquered the Gaetulians, a tribe of North Africa. Gaetulicus's own father-in-law, Lucius Petronius, was the commanding general of all Roman troops in the Lower Rhine. Seeing how popular Gaetulicus was among his troops, Gaius thought the general might be a potential threat to his own power. So Gaius executed him, and instead named Galba to take his place. Galba had been close to Gaius's grandmother, Livia, and, though Galba was short and hunchbacked, he had once run alongside Gaius's chariot for 20 miles. In the princeps' mind, Galba was a man worthy of replacing Gaetulicus. But now that he was actually in Germany, Gaius considered that an outright attack on the barbaric hordes suddenly seemed a bit challenging and even dangerous. So Gaius conspired with some of his German bodyguards that they should hide across the river. After lunch, Gaius was then informed that the enemy had been spotted across the river and they were close at hand. Immediately, Gaius rushed out with some friends and some members of the Praetorian cavalry. After crossing the river, they cut branches from trees and fashioned them into trophies. When they returned to camp later that night, they taunted all those who stayed behind as cowards. Gaius then awarded his war party with the trophies that they had fashioned from the cut branches. Gaius's casual relationship with violence took an even more grotesque turn. While gambling at dice, he had run out of cash. Instead of quitting the game, he summoned the census records of the Gallic provinces, selected the wealthiest men there, and ordered their execution. Now, with fresh funds thus secured, he returned to his fellow gamblers and joked that they were wagering over mere handfuls of coins, while he himself had just won 150 million sesterces. Not long thereafter, Gaius staged another stunt, whereby he placed outside the camp some hostages who had been taken earlier. During his meal, he jumped up, and with some cavalry, they chased down these, quote, escapees, before returning to camp and celebrating their own heroic efforts. The legion, which was only just preparing to join them, was now told to stand down, and in quoting Virgil, Gaius told them, "Bear up and prepare for better days." To the Senate and the people of Rome, Gaius sent a different note, chastising them for reveling and frequenting the diversions of the circus and the theater, and enjoying themselves at their villas while the emperor was fighting and exposing himself to the greatest dangers. As we heard last week, in the late summer, early fall of 39, Petronius arrived in Syria to relieve Vitellius of his command. Petronius took stock of the situation and then moved with 2 legions to Ptolemais for the winter, as he prepared to install the statue of Gaius in the Jerusalem temple. Ptolemais was about 25 miles south of Tyre, along the coast of Phoenicia. Petronius had his orders from the princeps himself. He was to be sure to install a statue of Gaius in the Jerusalem temple. He had relieved Vitellius of his command and was now in Ptolemais with 2 legions over the winter. Jews came to Ptolemais petitioning Petronius not to set up the image, saying that they were willing to die for their beliefs. Upon hearing their concerns, he recognized that erecting a statue of Gaius in the temple would mean great conflict and many deaths. He decided to go to Tiberias, on the Sea of Galilee, to assess the situation there, and perhaps he could find some more amenable partners. But there too he faced opposition with fervent Jews, reiterating the message he heard at Ptolemais. There was significant and frequent communication between Jews in Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and even Rome. Each kept the others informed about goings-on. The events in Alexandria had already been problematic. Jews there were being persecuted, and Philo himself went to Rome to plead their case, but they lost. Now, they told Petronius that the idea of placing a statue of Caesar in the Jerusalem temple was an outrage. For those of the sect of the Nazarene, they saw all of this as God's judgment on Jesus' own crucifixion and death. Petronius replied to the Jewish leaders before him that Judea and Galilee were weak. Were they really willing to go to war with Rome merely to prevent a statue from being erected in the temple? Petronius told them that he had his orders, and he would obey. In reply, the Jews said that they would, in fact, go to war with Rome over this issue. Just as Petronius had his orders and would obey, they too had orders from their God, and they would obey. Then, in an act reminiscent of Pilate's time, they knelt down and exposed their necks, inviting Petronius to kill them all. He wasn't going to do that and risk starting a war. The situation remained in this stalemate for many weeks. Jewish leaders eventually prevailed upon Petronius to write a letter to Gaius, explaining the situation. Surely Caesar is a reasonable person. He would find a way out of this quagmire without resorting to violence. Moreover, this issue had meant that the fields were not planted, and it was likely that there would not be a harvest, which in itself would lead to a famine in the province. Petronius called together the people in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee to tell them that they should go back to their fields and plant their crops. He would send the letter to Gaius, who might even cancel his order to erect the statue. However, if Gaius did not relent, Petronius said that he really was willing to go to war. In the letter to the princeps, Petronius indicated that he was perfectly willing to use military force, but that action would mean a deprivation of revenue from the region. Petronius did not know that Gaius was on an expedition to Germany. Any reply would be delayed. But as it happened, in Syria, the blue faction at the Circus of Antioch began to abuse the greens. The outbreak led to civil commotion in which many Jews were killed and their synagogues burned. The high priest of Jerusalem sent 30,000 men to Antioch to avenge the deaths of their fellow Jews, killing many residents there. The situation in Antioch was becoming more and more problematic. The Christians, for their part, tried to steer clear of any trouble. They saw in these signs clear indications of the end times. Civil unrest was about to boil over. For some of these Christians, they remembered Jesus weeping over Jerusalem and foretelling its eventual doom. Those days seemed all too close. Next time, we'll hear about Paul in Syria and his subsequent visit to Jerusalem to meet some of the leaders of the sect of the Nazarene.